99% of you are not subscribed to the channel. When I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will share a series of exclusive stories. Subscribe now. I waited in a dark cell, leaning against the cold metal walls. I no longer knew if it had been days or weeks since I had been captured. There seemed to be no concept of time on this side of the Imperial ship. Everything seemed dark and cold and hopeless. But I never gave up. As a human, it was in my nature to resist. My name is Jack Carter. I was once one of Earth's finest soldiers, a Marine in the Galactic War. But things didn't go as planned. His unit and I faced the Empire's largest fleet, and the war ended as it began. There were very few of us left, and I was a prisoner. I had heard that this vast empire controlled countless planets and species. Its technology was beyond our imagination. But a man's most powerful weapon is always his intelligence. Anyone in this galaxy who underestimated us made a big mistake. We are a species that never gives up, no matter how weak we may seem. And here I was, in this metal cell, trying to come up with an escape plan. My thoughts were interrupted by the opening of the door. 2 guards entered, stocky, gray-skinned creatures over 2 meters tall. They wielded energy weapons, and their eyes were cold. "By order of the Emperor, you are being brought in for questioning, human," one of them said. I shrugged. There was no point in resisting any longer. I didn't know what they would do in the interrogation room, but I was ready for anything to escape. They led me through a narrow corridor, the thick metal walls of the ship rising up around me. The inside of the Imperial ship was as cold and gloomy as the outside. At the end of the corridor, a large door opened, and I stepped inside to find an unexpected sight. This was not the Emperor's interrogation room, but a huge hall. I was led into a part of the palace decorated with marble floors, bright chandeliers, and magnificent statues. And there, near the great throne in the hall, stood a girl, young, noble, and dangerous. Her short black hair, emerald green eyes, and haughty expression revealed her to be the rebellious daughter of the Emperor. I remembered the rumors I had heard about her. Lydia was the future leader of the Empire, but she was a rebellious spirit who constantly questioned his rule. But I also knew that in her world, humans were considered weak and unimportant. "There she is," Princess Lydia said, pointing at me. "Bring the human." The guards pushed me forward. Lydia stared at me, examining me. When our eyes met for a moment, I felt hostility and contempt. It was obvious how little she cared for humans. "Why have you brought me here?" I asked, a harsh tone in my voice. I wasn't going to let her dominate me. Lydia smiled, a cold and arrogant smile. "How dare you look down on me, human?" she said, her voice almost mocking. "You are here because my father has given me permission to question you. You are weak in his eyes, but I am curious. Why do you find humans so precious? Why did you join this war?" I looked at him and tried to collect my thoughts for a few seconds. "We are not valuable because we try to control the galaxy," I said. "We are valuable because we never quit. We are warriors. What matters to us is our honor, to survive and to be free." Lydia raised her eyebrows. "Freedom. I hear that term a lot, but in the galaxy, freedom is an illusion. Everyone is bound to someone in some way. And you?" I said bravely, "Aren't you free, even as the Emperor's daughter?" My words must have disturbed her, for the smile fell from her face and something stirred in her eyes. But she did not interrupt. She just shook her head. "The answers to these questions are not as simple as you think," he said quietly. "But there are other matters at hand. My planet is threatened by a treacherous attack." For a moment the words echoed in my mind. A treacherous attack. I had to take advantage of this opportunity. But how? I could use Lydia's power and position. I had to get her to trust me. I had to use this opportunity in a clever way. "We can stop this attack," I said with determination in my voice. Lydia looked at me skeptically. "What do you mean?" "I have a plan to protect your planet," I said, taking a step toward her. "With human cunning, we can repel this attack. If you trust me, I will work with you." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "Why should I trust you? You are human, and like most species in the galaxy, I believe you are weak and small. I looked into her eyes, silently, because you have no choice. If your planet is attacked, I am the only one who can save you and your people. There was a moment of silence. Lydia seemed to weigh my words, but then I saw determination in her eyes. Okay, she finally said, but if this is a mistake, you will pay dearly. I knew then that I would do everything in my power to save both the planet and this princess. Lydia turned to me and gestured to her guards. What is your plan? She asked, looking me in the eye. The edge in her voice had faded, but she was still cautious. I agreed. It was never easy to work with the enemy, especially when it was a human. We need to find out who the organizers of this attack are and what their strategy is, I said. They will probably try to sabotage the planet's defenses from within. An attack of this magnitude cannot succeed without support from both inside and outside. Lydia narrowed her eyes. How do you know who these traitors are? You're not powerful enough in the galaxy to have that much information. I shrugged. We're human, maybe not strong, but we're good at gathering information. I only trust my intuition. No great battle can be won without weakness from within. Lydia thought for a moment. Then, shaking her head, she decided, I will give you a chance, but I can only keep it out of my father's sight. If your plan doesn't work, it won't just be the end of you, it will be the end of me. I nodded. I'm willing to take that risk, I said. After all, I had nothing to lose. I was already sentenced to death by the Empire, and this might be my only chance. Our first step was to check the planet's most critical defense points. Using a secret route, Lydia led me through a tunnel under the palace. This tunnel was an ancient escape route, no longer in use. We needed to survey the planet's infrastructure and monitor a wide area for traitors who might sabotage the defenses. We both knew that if we made a mistake, both the planet and Lydia's honor would be at stake. As the hours passed, the distance between Lydia and I grew smaller. The princess, who had initially treated me with distance and arrogance, now listened more attentively and valued what I had to say. As we began to move together, I realized how intelligent and courageous she was. She was not just an imperial figure, she was a strong leader, and at the same time, deep down, someone who was trying to find her own way. As they walked deeper into the tunnel, Lydia stopped for a moment. Why are you fighting us? She asked, her voice not as harsh as before. What do you think humans stand to gain from this war? This is not just a galactic war, I said. We humans are fighting for our freedom. But in this war, humans are not the only free ones. In the galaxy, we don't want the powerful to control everything. In a world where the big powers, like the Empire, control the whole galaxy, the little ones are oppressed. Humans may be seen in the lower echelons of the galaxy, but we don't just want to survive, we want to grow, evolve, and be free. That is why the war continues. Lydia nodded. Freedom, she whispered, the thing you're all after. Her eyes seemed to be deep in thought. Then we noticed a light at the end of the tunnel, right in front of us, where the saboteurs were. Lydia moved quickly, leaned silently against the wall, and gestured to me. I was not surprised to see the saboteurs working with the Imperial soldiers. The traitors would provide support from inside the planet once the attack began. Just as I had predicted, Lydia turned to me without taking her eyes off them. What do we do? She whispered. We have to take them both out, I said, but we have to be careful. We can't raise the alarm, or the whole plan will fall apart. We had to use every means at our disposal to silently neutralize the saboteurs inside, so I thought of the best way to trap them. I turned to Lydia and whispered a plan. She nodded with the determination of a patient leader. Lydia stepped forward, walked inside, and spoke directly to the traitors. Her eyes shone with courage. What are you doing here? She shouted, using her authority as the Emperor's daughter. The traitors were taken aback by Lydia's unexpected presence. While they were surprised, I sneaked up behind them and neutralized them. Thanks to Lydia's strength and skill, eliminating these traitors was easier than I expected. Now we had eliminated the threat that was trying to sabotage the planet's defenses. When it was all over, Lydia turned to me and took a deep breath. I never thought my cooperation with you would end so well, she said. You see, humans are not all weak and helpless, I said. We act in the right way at the right time. Lydia looked at me silently for a few seconds. Then something changed in her eyes. Has your hostility towards me been replaced by trust? She asked. For now, I said, smiling. But time will tell if it is only temporary. Lydia smiled. Perhaps other beings in the galaxy will change their minds as they get to know you. At that moment, I felt the bond between us change. Lydia no longer saw me as a mere human. A trust, an even deeper connection began to form between us. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new alliance in the galaxy. We defended the planet, but the war was far from over. I was no longer just a soldier, but an ally, even a friend, alongside Lydia. Together with Lydia, we began to sow the seeds of a great resistance against the Empire. The attack was repulsed, the saboteurs neutralized. But we knew it was only the beginning. Even though we had defended Lydia's planet, the real threat from the Empire still remained. We had to find out who was behind the treacherous attack, and Lydia had to tread very carefully with her Emperor father. After all, we didn't want to go to war with him. We wanted to weaken him from within. When Lydia and I returned to the palace, those cold and magnificent corridors were no longer as foreign to me as they had been. Now Lydia and I shared a common goal, to start a new resistance against the oppression of the Empire. But to do so, we needed powerful allies. I knew that in every corner of the galaxy, there were planets and peoples overwhelmed by the Empire's oppression. Humans were trapped in these chains, and with Lydia's help, we could free them. What shall we do as a first step? I asked, watching Lydia out of the corner of my eye. Lydia took a deep breath and looked around, as if afraid that even the walls could hear us. It's impossible to confront my father directly. I grew up in his shadow, and he will destroy anything that challenges his power. But we can build resistance from within. If we can find powerful allies, we can weaken his rule. From within the palace. I asked. It was a dangerous proposal. Even if the Emperor had full confidence in his own daughter, it was certainly a risk for Lydia to carry out such a grand plan. Lydia shook her head. We must find support not only within the palace, but also on the outer planets who are tired of my father's rule. Many beings in the galaxy live under the yoke of the Empire, but dare not speak out. We can be a spark. I realized that the plan was beginning to take shape. Lydia was not only a powerful imperial princess, she was also intelligent. She understood how humans viewed the galaxy, as weak and insignificant, but she also began to see how dangerous and powerful our warrior spirit could be. And it would take Lydia's courage and my human cunning to change the galaxy. As they continued through the cold corridors of the palace, Lydia stopped and thought for a moment. I need to introduce you to someone, she said, her voice slightly hesitant. If we can make an alliance with him, we can take the first big step. Who? I asked, trying to figure out Lydia's plan. A friend. Someone who has been in the palace for a long time, but who actually dislikes my father. He is known for his intelligence, but has managed to stay hidden from everyone. If we can trust him, we can learn the Empire's weak points. I was curious about this person. If the person Lydia was talking about was privy to the secrets of the Empire, we might have gained a powerful ally. But how do we get to him? I asked. He's already at the palace. We'll find a way, Lydia said, smiling mysteriously at me. That night, Lydia secretly took me to the back of the palace. This was the most secluded part of the palace. Those who had served the royal family for centuries were here, low-ranking officials and servants. We moved slowly, silently, with Lydia leading the way through a narrow passage to a small room. It was almost completely dark, but I could sense that someone was inside. After a moment, the face of an old man appeared in the dim light. He looked wise, with a long white beard, wrinkles around his eyes, and a deep, thoughtful gaze. But he also looked at me with the eyes of someone who had kept a secret for years. Lord Arion, Lydia said, addressing him with respect. This is my ally, Jack Carter. I trust you because someone like you has the intelligence to crack this empire from the inside. Arion looked at me for a few seconds, then turned to Lydia. "You trust a human, Princess. Very brave." Lydia held her head up. "He's not just a human. He saw something my father didn't, and we need him." Arion smiled, as if he felt that something he had been waiting for years had come true. "Then we have a great task ahead of us. If we are to destroy this empire, we must first uncover its deepest secrets." From that moment on, our plan was clear. Arion had access to the most secret parts of the palace. The strategic weaknesses of the empire, the betrayals behind the scenes, the complex relations with the outer planets. These were all things that Arion knew, and we had to use this information. Our first target was a general with close ties to Lydia's father. He was a favorite of the emperor and, with his support, was responsible for much treachery within the palace. If we could neutralize him, it would be much easier to start the resistance. The plan was simple. We would trap the general, but would not be as simple as it seemed. When Arion said he knew his weakness, Lydia was immediately interested. The general's loyalty was based solely on power, and he was quick to change sides when his interests were threatened. "What happens if we go after this general?" I asked Arion. "Once his loyalty to the emperor is shaken, we can bring him over to our side. But that will only be the beginning. Part of a destructive plan against Lydia's father," Arion said, taking a deep breath. "And so we have taken our first step. With Lydia's courage, Arion's wisdom, and my warrior spirit, we laid the foundation for a great resistance against the empire." The plan we had devised with Arion's help was clever, but risky. It would not be easy to trap one of the empire's generals, especially when he was one of Lydia's father's favorites. But thanks to Arion's deep knowledge and strategic acumen, we had a powerful way to pull it off. Arion knew that the general's greatest weakness was his own self-interest. His loyalty to the emperor depended solely on the power he enjoyed under the empire. The moment his authority weakened, the general's credibility could quickly collapse. We had to offer him a strong alternative, join the resistance, and become part of a new order under Lydia's leadership. First, we had to make sure that the general lost his military support, so we forged documents that would arouse the suspicions of some officers and soldiers in the palace, giving the impression that the general had betrayed the emperor for his own gain. If these forged documents were in the right hands when they were circulated, even the soldiers inside the palace might question the general's true intentions. The first step in our plan was to get these documents into the general's hands. That way we could create an environment where even his own soldiers would lose faith in him. We orchestrated this with Arion's help. The secret messages and rumors we spread among the traitors in the palace soon began to undermine the general's loyalty. But that was only the beginning. One evening, in one of the cold and magnificent halls of the palace, Lydia and I met. We discussed the rest of the plan. Lydia could not hide her trepidation at being part of such a plot against her father, but her determination was evident in her eyes. "The general is slowly being isolated," I told Lydia quietly. "The next step is to completely destroy his loyalty to the emperor. If he feels threatened, he may change sides." Lydia nodded. "That will really weaken my father. But if we do that, we can be sure that the general will be driven by a desire for revenge. Will we be able to control him? If we can promise him a more powerful position, we can use his ambition to our advantage," I said. "It's a power play for him. If we can establish a new order, that will be more attractive to him than his loyalty to the emperor." There was hesitation on Lydia's face, but finally she nodded in agreement. "That is true. We will take that risk. If we succeed, my father will lose his most powerful ally, weakening his control over the empire." As our plan took effect, tensions began to rise in the palace. The general slowly became isolated from his own soldiers and allies. Rumors about him spread throughout the palace. As he began to lose credibility, Lydia approached him with an unexpected proposal. One night, Lydia and I sneaked into the general's private residence. Arion had arranged a safe route so that no one would see us. When we stopped at the door, Lydia turned to me and took a deep breath. "When this is all over, nothing will ever be the same again," she said. "I know," I said, but we have much to gain in this war. If we can forge this alliance, the fall of the Emperor is imminent." Lydia knocked on the door. The general was surprised to see who we were, but let us in quietly. He was very worried about his situation. He was already beginning to feel how weak his position inside the palace had become. Lydia noticed the tension on the general's face and got right to the point. "I will tell you the truth," she said coldly. "My father will turn his back on you. The moment he loses faith in you, he will dispose of you. But we can offer you a new chance." The general narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean, Princess?" Lydia approached him and spoke in a low voice. "My father's days are numbered. If you move with us, you can have the most powerful position in this new order. But if you remain loyal to my father, he will take you with him when this empire collapses." The general was silent for several seconds. His thoughts were written all over his face. His hunger for power showed that he did not want to miss the opportunity Lydia offered him. Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke. "If I join you, what will you promise me?" Lydia smiled and looked into the general's eyes. "You will become the most powerful general in the new realm. Your loyalty will give us the power to lead the resistance across the galaxy." The general nodded, as if he had finally made up his mind. "It's a deal," he said. At that moment, Lydia and I exchanged glances. The first step to success had been made. The general had renounced his loyalty to the Emperor. Now we could use his power to hasten the fall of the Empire. The general's defection caused great chaos in the palace. The Emperor's failure to stand by one of his most powerful allies shook the confidence of other supporters in the palace. With Lydia, we now had the power to bring down the Empire from within, and that power could inspire other oppressed planets across the galaxy. This was only the beginning. Lydia's resistance to her father, the Emperor, had begun to grow into a great freedom movement across the galaxy. The Emperor had not yet realized Lydia's plans, but that couldn't last. We had to plan our next steps carefully. We needed a spark that would both mobilize other forces within the Empire and ignite the resistance. I didn't know if we could win this war with Lydia's courage and leadership, but I did know that together we were close to establishing a new order in the galaxy. And no matter what happened, the bond between Lydia and I grew stronger every day. We were no longer just resistance leaders and allies. We were two people who trusted each other, who shared a destiny. With the general on our side, the balance of power within the Empire began to shift. But that meant the war had only just begun. Lydia's father, the Emperor, was not yet aware of this betrayal, but as the turmoil in the palace grew, we could not hide it for long. We had to move on to the next phase of our plan, contacting resistance leaders on other planets and convincing them to fight against the Empire. Lydia suggested a meeting at the palace. It would be the perfect opportunity to divert the Emperor's attention and communicate with forces beyond his control. Meanwhile, I would secretly seek ways to reach the leaders of the resistance. One night, during one of our days at the palace, Lydia approached me and said in a low voice, "Are you ready, Jack? Tomorrow we are going to take a big step. Not only do we have to calm my father, we have to send a message to the outer planets to take action." I nodded. "I am ready, but it's too big a risk, Lydia. If we make a mistake at the palace, your father could find out all our plans." Lydia smiled, but the tension was visible on her face. "I know, but we have no choice. If we fail, not only our freedom is at stake, but that of many planets." The next day, an important meeting was held in the palace. The Emperor was planning a new military move of galactic proportions and was discussing it with his most loyal generals. Lydia sat quietly next to her father. I, on the other hand, stayed out of the meeting, conducting my secret business outside under the pretext of a mission we had concocted to allow me to move freely around the palace. Using the secret routes Arion had given us, I sent secret messages during the meeting to planets that might join the resistance movement against the Empire. These messages were to be delivered to resistance leaders throughout the galaxy, urging them to rise up against Lydia's father. Lydia's influence in the palace made it almost impossible to trace the messages. But I was nervous every step of the way. If I made a mistake, Lydia's life and mine would be in danger. But I had to take that chance. Lydia and I had to work together to start the resistance. After the meeting ended, I returned to Lydia, her face tense, but her gaze determined. "Is everything okay?" I asked in a low voice. "For now, yes," Lydia said. "My father is planning a big military move, but it's still in preparation. That will buy us some time. Have you been able to communicate with the resistance?" I nodded. "Messages have been sent. For now, all we can do is wait. If other planets decide to join the resistance, we can start a great revolt against the Emperor." Lydia took a deep breath. "And what if we fail? What if my father discovers this move?" "We will succeed," I said, looking into Lydia's eyes. "This isn't just your fight or mine. We are fighting for the freedom of the galaxy. It's time to stop your father." In that moment, I felt a bond grow between Lydia and I. We were not just allies, but two warriors united by destiny, and we had to trust each other to change the galaxy. Later that night, in a quiet room away from the palace, Lydia and I were alone. We went over our plans, but in the quiet moments between us, we could feel the trust and depth of our bond. We were both under a great burden, but sharing that burden gave us courage. "It won't be easy breaking my father's trust," Lydia said, unable to hide the worry in her voice. "But with you, I feel like anything is possible." I took her hand and squeezed it between my fingers. "Together, we will win this war, Lydia. No matter how great the Empire's power, they will not be able to match our courage." In that moment, for a moment, I felt like everything in the world didn't matter. It was just Lydia and me, and together we were so strong. But we knew the war was not over. We had a great battle ahead of us. The next morning, as the meetings in the Emperor's palace continued, a quiet activity began outside the palace. Some of the resistance leaders had begun delivering messages to Lydia. The first signs of support were coming from distant planets. This gave us hope. However, the strength of the resistance was still fragile, and the Emperor could realize the situation at any moment. As Lydia and I planned our next move, we needed to convince the last few generals still loyal to the Emperor to switch sides. If we could increase our power inside the palace, we could further weaken the Emperor's power. But this mission was far more dangerous than anything we had done before. We were in danger of being captured at any moment, but with each passing day, the bond and trust between Lydia and I grew stronger. We both believed that we could win the war, and we couldn't wait to strike the final blow. The positive response from the resistance leaders gave Lydia and me a morale boost, but we knew there would be many more obstacles along the way. The Emperor was still strong, and if he realized our plans, he could crush us. But there was no turning back now. The only option left was to take even bigger steps. Winning over some of the generals who had sided with the Emperor at court was one of the most critical stages of our plan. Lydia's plan was to weaken the generals and shake their confidence in the Emperor. But this move could raise serious suspicions at court. If we made the slightest mistake, the Emperor could be alerted and everything would be ruined. One morning, Lydia and I went to the residence of General Corder, one of the most trusted generals in the palace. General Corder was a tough and disciplined military leader known for his loyalty to the Emperor. But thanks to Lydia's deep knowledge, it was discovered that Corder had actually been secretly involved with the resistance before. We wanted to use this information to try to get him on our side. When we arrived at Corder's private residence, I was nervous. If Corder betrayed us, our plan would be over before it began. But Lydia's determination gave me strength. She had lived with her father for years and had seen his tricks and weaknesses up close. When I knocked on the general's door, I could feel Lydia calming him down. When the door opened, Corder looked at us sternly. "Princess Lydia, I am here to help you, but I cannot hide my doubts. Your father's kingdom is in great danger, and I don't know what you're planning." Lydia nodded calmly. "General Corder, I invited you here because my father's power has become an instrument of oppression, not only over planets, but over the entire galaxy. If we don't put a stop to it, we will all be destroyed by his ambitions." The hard expression on Corder's face began to soften. His deep respect for Lydia was evident in his eyes. "It is amazing to know that you dared to start this rebellion," he said. But it makes me wonder if you think you're worthy to rule this realm. How will you prove that you are as powerful as your father? Lydia's courage and leadership will bring a very different kind of rule from the oppressive regime of her father. We want to build an empire based on the good of the people, not just power. If you share this vision, you can be a part of this movement. Quarter turned his eyes to me, looking a little wary, but also thoughtful. I had no idea that the alliance between humans and Seraphians could be so strong, but I understand that you are indeed working together. Under Lydia's determined gaze, Quarter finally nodded. I will take the risk. I, too, am growing uneasy about the Emperor's plans. If you truly have the power to shake his throne, I will be with you. But know this. If you fail, we will all lose our lives. I took a deep breath. Getting Quarter on our side was an important part of our plan. We now had one of the strongest supporters in the palace, and that meant we could build a stronger resistance to the Emperor's power. With Quarter on our side, we slowly began to influence other generals and senior military officials. Lydia's intelligence and leadership were at work every step of the way. Her vision strengthened the idea of a new order that would bind not only the Empire, but the galaxy. But no matter how strong we were, the Emperor would eventually realize everything. Time was running out for us to strike the final blow. Lydia and I formed our plans to start a larger rebellion, with the only goal now being to depose Lydia's father and establish a new order. A few days later, Lydia's father was to attend an important military meeting. This meeting was organized to discuss the new military strategies of the Empire, and all the important generals and commanders would be there. This was the perfect opportunity to put our plan into action. General Quarter and the other generals on our side would move against the Emperor during the meeting. There was a lot of activity in the palace that day. Everyone was getting ready for the meeting. Lydia and I were secretly making our final preparations, carefully planning every step, but I was worried. If we made a mistake in such a big move, it could end the whole resistance movement. Lydia looked at me with determination in her eyes. "This is our best chance," she said. "If we can overthrow my father, we can establish a new order in the galaxy." "We will succeed," I said. "We trust each other on this path. Whatever happens, we are together." As the meeting began, there was a deep silence in the palace. It was like the uneasy silence before a great explosion. I hid in the shadows, ready and waiting, waves of adrenaline surging through me. This moment was the final step in our resistance to the Emperor. Lydia watched the meeting from her father's side, playing the role of loyal princess. But a silent agreement between us would ensure that everything would happen just in time. General Quarter and the other generals were present at the meeting, impatient to act. And the moment came. General Quarter stood up in the middle of the meeting, turned to the Emperor, and said in a low but firm voice, "Enough is enough. The Empire cannot exist solely to feed your ego." The Emperor's eyes immediately flashed with anger. "How dare you defy me?" he thundered. But Quarter was not alone. Other generals also stood up and defied the Emperor, making it clear that they defied him. At that moment, chaos broke out in the palace. A great conflict broke out between the Emperor's generals and soldiers, Lydia and those loyal to me. But Lydia's plan had all the details for us to emerge victorious from this conflict. When the battle broke out, Lydia and I held each other tightly. The resistance we had begun to change the galaxy was now at a point of no return. We would win or lose. But the important thing was that we were side by side, together in this fight. And in that moment, in Lydia's eyes, I saw the light of not just a rebel, but a leader, a queen. The walls of the palace echoed. Swords clashed. The flashes of laser guns illuminated the dark corridors. General Quarter and the other generals had begun a rebellion against the Emperor's loyal soldiers, led by Lydia and me. When the rebellion began, we thought it would end quickly, but the Emperor's power was greater than we thought. Lydia entered the battlefield not as a leader seeking her father's throne, but as a hero fighting for the freedom of her people. Her determination and courage gave me strength with every step I took. As we fought side by side, I felt that our bond was fueled not only by our desire to save the galaxy, but also by our deep love for each other. But the Emperor would not give up. He sent troops to every corner of the palace to crush the rebellion. Even General Quarter's defection did not completely weaken the Emperor's power. The fighting moved to the main hall of the palace. Finally, Lydia and I were forced to face the Emperor. In the great throne room, we could feel the cold fury in the Emperor's eyes. The man who had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist for years now stood before his daughter and a human. As Lydia stepped up to her father, the tension between them sliced through the air like a sharp knife. "Father," Lydia said, her voice firm yet emotional, "this war is over. Either you will leave this throne for the freedom of the people, or the resistance will overthrow you." The Emperor drew his sword and looked at his daughter with a wry smile. "I didn't think you had the courage to commit this treason, but you are wrong, Lydia. The throne is mine, and you will always be my little girl." A tear appeared in Lydia's eyes, but there was no hesitation in her voice. "Father, you are destroying the galaxy. I can no longer be a part of this atrocity." At that moment, the Emperor lunged at me with great speed. As I reflexively backed away, Lydia stepped in front of her father and stopped him with her sword. The duel that ensued was one of the sharpest moments to echo through the palace. Forced to fight her father, Lydia went through a great inner struggle. There was both anger and sadness in every blow. The Emperor paused for a moment as he fought his daughter. Lydia waited with her sword pointed at her father, a determined look in her eyes. But there was something in Lydia that prevented her from delivering the final blow. She was not just a rebel leader. She was a daughter, and standing before her was the man who had guided her all her life. "You won't be able to," the Emperor said sarcastically. "A son cannot kill his father." But at that moment, I saw that the bond between them was broken. Lydia bowed her head slightly and slowly lowered her sword, despite the tears in her eyes. "No, I will not kill you, father, but I will not leave you this throne. Your power is over." At that moment, General Quarter and the resistance forces entered the room. The Emperor's army was completely defeated. Lydia took one last look at her father and deposed him. The Emperor had to surrender, beaten and defeated. At that moment, a great silence fell over the palace. Lydia knelt beside her father and made one of the most difficult decisions of her life. But it was necessary to save the galaxy. Lydia had overthrown the Emperor, but she also carried the deep pain she felt as his daughter. With the victory of the resistance, a popular government was installed in the palace. After overthrowing her father's oppressive regime, Lydia chose to establish a system based on the will of the people rather than ascend to the throne. The Empire's oppressive legacy ended, and a new era of peace began in the galaxy. Months later, as I sat side by side with Lydia in an old throne room in the palace, liberation movements had swept across the galaxy. She was no longer a rebel leader, but the savior of the galaxy. But our bond wasn't just about winning the war. Lydia and I had become allies and lovers. "It's been an incredible journey. To accomplish so much," Lydia said, looking off into the distance. "Yes, and we did it together," I said, taking her hand. Lydia turned to me with a smile. "Now we're here to build a future, not just survive. And I want to do that with you, Jack." In that moment, I realized that Lydia was not just a comrade in arms. I was going to build a life with her. And in this new era of peace in the galaxy, there was no longer war, but love and hope. With Lydia's leadership and the trust of the people, a new order was established in the galaxy. And we were not just a part of it, we were its founders. Our destinies woven together by the love we felt for each other as we saved the galaxy. It was a victory not only of rebellion, but of love. And that victory would last forever.